So my name's Rob Hulme from Beanstalk. You've probably seen us roaming around the halls. Beanstalk's an innovation agency from based here in Melbourne and Singapore and Perth. And today's innovation focus is on entrepreneurs. And so we thought, what better way to add some value, some real value to the panel today is to invite Gemma to join our panel. So she's our special guest. So thank you so much, Gemma, for agreeing to... She's got a particular role today to grill the other panellists with all of the tough questions. So take a seat here, and I'll ask the other panellists to come out, please. So we have Nigel from Rainmaking in Singapore. Thank you, Nigel. We have Gerardo. Gerardo is the Global Food Innovation Director at Nestlé. We have Emma Coath. She's Managing Director for Rocket Seeder Accelerator here in Melbourne and also the Director of the new Grow Accelerator in Singapore. And finally, we have Renske. So Renske comes to us from San Francisco?
Close enough.
Yeah, close enough. She's the Managing Director of Food Systems 6. So give them a round of applause, please. So today we're going to explore all about entrepreneurs and innovation. And I want to start by framing the question in and around giving innovators like Gemma the best start. What's the biggest challenge? Maybe Gerardo, you can start. What's the biggest challenge facing our food industry? And how do we give Gemma the chance to bring that innovation to life?
Okay, well that's a very broad question. I think many of the film snippets that I've seen over the last day or so, whether that's, and you mentioned it in your introduction, water scarcity, land degradation, young people going into the practice of farming as well. How do you encourage young people to get into this practice? Because if you look at the average age of farmers, they're getting older and young people aren't going into the practice. So one of the challenges that we had on our open innovation platform was exactly that. How do you encourage agripreneurship? How do you get young people into the practice of farming? Because without these individuals coming into this particular practice, who's going to grow our food and meet the demands of 10 million people in the next 5, 10, 15 years or so? We also have a very strong, what we call Nestlé for Youth program as well, where we're encouraging young people to become entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs of tomorrow as well. So many of the practices that we do internally is encouraging young people like Gemma to collaborate with organizations of our size and bring in a different point of view, a different dynamic, a different energy into a very, we're 153 years old, so we're a very conservative, very Swiss organization, but we need, people like Gemma in a way to sort of, shake the tree a little bit as well.
So maybe my next question should be to Gemma. So tell us a little bit about what your innovation is and what you're working on, and how did the seed start for you?
So basically, I live on a rescue farm down in the Mornington Peninsula of Melbourne. So we quite often get orphaned animals from farms that are affected by floods, fires, or drought. And it pains me to see the impact that this not only has on the animals, the impact it has on the people caring for them. So I also get affected often by drought on my farm, and we have to source feed from different places, and because of the severity of the situation, they don't take the proper care and time in the feed that they're sourcing. So quite often it can be contaminated with weeds, mold, all of the above, and it kills our animals. It killed my pets. So I've taken existing technologies and put them together in a way to hopefully solve this problem.
And what sort of technology is that, Gemma?
So that is a sustainable fodder machine that eliminates the chances of mold to grow in it,
okay,
which means that the feed won't be contaminated and that the farmers can grow it on their farm and know that they have a sufficient amount of feed to feed their animals.
Fantastic. And Renske and Emma, running accelerators, as you do, what's your best piece of advice for someone like Emma as a young entrepreneur? And she's a little bit modest. It's actually got her own business, so she's a bit more confident than I was when I was 14 years old. But what's your best piece of advice for young up-and-coming entrepreneurs that are looking to solve the big challenges around our food system?
Yeah, so this we're not ageist in our intake of participants in our program here in Rocket Cedar. We're based in Melbourne, but gee, after meeting Gemma, it starts to make me think we should be doing something with the younger generation, just the stories, amazing stories that we hear and the potential there, and we should be supporting these young people with amazing ideas. So I'm not sure, we're only one day a week for 12 weeks, if you can get that amount of time off from school. But we definitely should be working something out for Rocket Cedar. But in terms of advice, I think just social media, obviously, you're very well aware of that, but just make yourself known in any way. Just communicate what you're doing. Use your schools, your teachers, and any networks that you have. Government, I'm sure the Victorian government here would be really pleased to know what you're doing. So just shout out. I think and find some mentors as well.
Renske?
Yeah, I'll second that, and also just congratulations. I mean, you're incredible vision and inspiration, and stay true to that story. That's really what is inspiring you. That's driving you in your passion. And then, like Emma said, just ask for help. I think a lot of times we see entrepreneurs are really protective of their ideas. I think it's important to know that ideas are one part of the equation, but execution and continuing to build and grow will only happen by asking for help and being really open source with what you're thinking about and finding people who would be happy to help you.
Amazing, thank you.
This whole panel.
So Renske, I mean, in terms of, for all of you guys, in terms of mentors and accessing mentors, how do entrepreneurs go about tapping into that? Because often it's about that connection, it's about being given encouragement or access to networks. For your programs, how do you actually tap into that and allow the cohort members to actually access mentors?
I'm happy to start. I'm sure we all have different approaches, but probably a lot of similarities. So our program is really custom to meet the needs of all of the entrepreneurs that we are supporting, and they're wildly different, as you might imagine. The entrepreneurs are coming with their solution and their expertise, and our goal as a program is to really help fill out what is missing from the equation. So our work with mentors is very, very custom, and it's very driven around a set of milestones that an entrepreneur is working towards and finding the right set of people at the table. So that ranges, of course, from investment advice to technical expertise to how do you get a product on a shelf at Whole Foods, U.S. grocery. You may have heard of it. So it really is varied. And then I think for us, it's also about timing, and it's about connecting with mentors and coaches and people with different levels of expertise that are really drawn and attracted to working with entrepreneurs, either because their day-to-day doesn't really allow that kind of creativity or innovation, or because they're really passionate about the really world-changing work that the entrepreneurs are doing, like you. So.
Yeah, and I should just mention here and point out, particularly our accelerators are similar in the fact that we see ourselves, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as ecosystem builders. So, and that's something which a lot of people may not realise. And FS6 is a not-for-profit. It's moving to a slightly different model. We're a not-for-profit, so it's really important that we build the network of mentors and other support people in the industry just outside of our program, and that's we're involved in Singapore as well. So it's important in.
So you think there's lots of room for plenty of players, plenty of actors.
Absolutely.
In that space.
Yeah, as long as we collaborate.
We'll get
together.
on to the Singapore in a minute. So, Gerardo?
Sure. You want to go? Sure. I can go. So how do you get the best mentors? I think the main thing you think about mentors and what they really do ultimately is bridging a connection with you, for you. And ultimately, that means taking on the goodwill that they have with other people, other stakeholders, other actors within the ecosystem. So the one thing that we always look out for, so we run Startup Bootcamp, which is an accelerator program, about 20 programs, about 800 startups, and about $1.8 billion in our portfolio. And the main thing that we always find, look for in mentors is someone who has a real problem to solve. All our accelerator programs are very much demand-led challenges. So looking for problem statement owners, the one who really wants to solve it, the one who really cares about the solution. They're the ones that you want to find, if anything.
Okay.
Yeah, and just building on the point that Renske made, at Nestlé we have so many different types of models and platforms that mentorship basically comes in a very customized or personalized form. If you're coming through the Open Innovation platform, we've already selected you as a startup, so you're going to get very direct support and mentorship against that business problem or challenge that we've recruited your solution to address. If you're coming through one of our accelerator programs, there will be different types of access to R&D, our science and technology teams, our commercial teams as well. To your point about how do you get stuff through the door, how do you commercialize it, and how do you get it ready for the retail launch as well. So it really does depend on which part of the funnel and which sort of swim lane you come through when you work with us.
Yeah, okay. So just moving on now to multinationals, and in terms of the sector that's developing. I mean, we all read about plant-based alternates and meat mimics. Are multinationals already been disrupted, do you think, Gerardo, or is it that there's an adaptation of the business model, and there's a corporate venturing, there's maybe internal ideation, but there's also external partnering with startups like Gemma?
It's funny when people ask, or they mention the word disruption when they link it to the word multinational, because competition has always been there.
Yeah.
Now we're just using, instead of the word competition, we're using disruption. So we've always, doesn't matter which type of FMCG or F&B company you are, there's always been competition there. I think what we're seeing much more prolific now is that it's not just the other big guys who are eating or capturing market share from you. It's the faceless or nameless startups who have found a way to look at the value chain of any big business or any big brand and look at where are there gaps in that value chain, and how can I provide a better, more seamless, more effective consumer experience than what the current brand or multinational is doing right now. So the speed of that change has changed dramatically. So that I would agree with you. When I started out in Nestlé 23 years ago, you were more worried about the other big guys in the sandbox. Now you have hundreds, if not thousands, of players who have a very unique and very creative way of slicing and dicing your value chain and coming up with a different way of providing that service proposition for the consumer. I think also the increase in all of the different applications of technology has made life very, very interesting in the sandbox as well. So for us as an organization, remember we're 330,000 people, we're this Swiss conservative company. Moving that super tanker or moving the needle in that super tanker takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And that's why, over the last 5 to 8 years, we've started to experiment with many of the platforms that we're discussing today, because you don't have the luxury of standing on the sidelines and watching your business being eroded. You just physically can't do that.
Yeah. So do you think that a startup is the antithesis of a multinational, that in terms of agility and speed and adaptability, or is it can they coexist? Maybe can I ask Nigel here to answer that, because I think you're working in corporate venturing and bridging that ecosystem.
Very much so. Think of us like a startup API, if anything, for the corporates. And to add on to Gerardo's point, putting some numbers to that. Why competition to disruption? In the 1950s, the S&P companies on the S&P would stay there for about 61 years on average, for example. Today, the number is about less than 20 years. It's phenomenal. Now the game is not about trying to survive. The game is about trying to die more efficiently. You have a cash cow today. The whole point now is to milk that cash cow as efficiently as you can, so you get as efficient. Strengthen your core, get digitized, get automated, and start getting more efficient to quickly die. The game there is then finding the hockey stick curve. what's the new business model to find, for example. Any innovation activity has to be derived along those two lines. How do I die more efficiently? How do I find a new area of growth? And I've forgotten your question, actually.
That's okay. But, I think...
Is there room for them to play together?
Yes.
Tons, actually. And I think if we think about it fundamentally, it's a shift towards a new business model. I think where the difficulty lies in... Or maybe let me use an analogy instead. Think of corporates like... think of startups like lions. Right? They have to eat, they have to keep moving. If they stop eating, they die. So they need to constantly evolve and adapt and find product market fit. Corporates, on the other hand, are a bit like the emperor penguins, where they can stay, they can gestate, they can incubate, they can hibernate for months on end. They don't need to eat. May not be the best position to be in, but they survive. And so the idea is, how do you combine the two mindsets together? And this is something that I think Gerardo as well and I have a very intimate experience in trying to understand how do we help startups work better with large corporations, or on his side, how do we help large corporates move faster with startups? There's tons to do, but it comes down to a few things, if you ask me. And feel free to add on. I think the first one is really ultimately problem definition. And it all starts from there. Once you have a really clear idea of the problem, it doesn't matter who the solution is, where they're from, how mature, how immature they are, what industry they're from even. Once you've got a really good lock on what the problem is, you can verbalize that really clearly. Everything flows from there.
Okay, perfect. So maybe over to our accelerators here. I'm just looking to you. Do you think that these latest trends in plant-based foods in particular, do you think that's tofu 2.0, or is this something that's going to be sustainable?
I was hoping I could talk about the corporate landscape, but
you can do
can
that
I just
too.
add a thing there? Yeah, I mean, I think part of what is interesting to me in terms of the evolution of this space is, over the last 5 to 7 years, we're also seeing some startups that are actually not interested in corporate partnerships. So with all due respect to the corporate relationships, and I have some at my accelerator as well, but there is, I think, there is a tangible shift towards companies that are actually looking to build value and aren't interested necessarily in being acquired. They're looking more for strategic partnerships, and we have some good examples in our portfolio of what has worked really well in that regard, and then we have some examples of what hasn't worked so well as well. We can talk about that offline. As far as plant-based, can you repeat the question?
Just is it a trend that's going to deepen and as we go forward, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess coming at the work like we do at Food System 6 and with First Course Capital, we are looking to solve for some of the greatest challenges that we're all very well aware of here in terms of the impact that the current extractive industrial agriculture model has had on our planet, on rural communities, on human health. So I mean, this particular moment in time, I think, is really representative of a broader transformation that has been brewing for decades. So I think we're just at the beginning of another evolution in terms of what the plant-based space looks like. Deeper into supply chain, a much greater focus on transparency and ingredients, and I think a focus on the human health of the alternatives that are out there. So I think, I don't know if this is tofu, I don't know how to necessarily put that in an operating system standpoint, but I do think there's a lot more that is coming that is aligned with the transformation that I think this particular trend is really seeking to address.
And Renske, while you've got the microphone, can you just tell us a little bit more about FS6, because it's really intriguing, about the philanthropic part of what you do?
Yeah, so Food System 6 is a nonprofit accelerator. So in the United States, we're a 501c3 tax-exempt public organization operating in the public interest. So all of our work is designed around a specific set of impact indicators that we believe need to form the basis of what we call Food System 6, the next operating system for how we grow, produce, and distribute food. In large part, we have directed philanthropic capital to build this ecosystem and to help support the startups in our portfolio, in part because we think that is capital that is more aligned and comes with a lot of domain expertise and knowledge around the challenges in our food system, but also is very patient and can really help in the early stages of de-risking companies for later stage investments. So there's
fantastic.
More.
Gemma.
That's fantastic. I'm very envious of you. Being based in the US, it's not the same situation here.
Why isn't it the same?
Just from my perspective and what I've been involved in government and so forth, it isn't. And it's not just the philanthropic side of things. It's not that they don't spend money in our industry. They do, but it's more likely sort of here's $2 million or something like that to spend on the drought or something like that.
Okay.
It's not a sort of a smart way of spending money.
Okay.
Like, giving it to an accelerator called Rocket Seeder. But it's also the same applies in terms of corporate in Australia as well. We're just not quite there yet in understanding how corporate can support the startup innovation ecosystem. I guess it's all quite new in Australia, and it's early days, and it's just building the story and the business case, I guess, for them.
Right. So you think, that was going to be my next question. Do you think accelerators in and around food and ag in particular, there's a lot of criticism, not directed towards you, but just generally that perhaps, there's not enough patient capital, there's not enough long-term focus that otherwise comes from an accelerator, which is typically a short cohort over 3, 5, 6 months.
Yeah.
Do accelerators really work in food and ag, or is it just something that's been adapted from a fintech or a medtech perspective?
Yeah, well, I think it's just important to realise, and I've got a few alumni members in the audience here supporting me, which is fantastic. Thanks, guys. That it's just not the period of the program, and where they're committed, whether we're equity based or not. They're part of the team. We're part of their team. Beyond the 12 or 14 weeks, however long the accelerator program goes for. So I think people. That's really important for people to understand. Is it's just not a short-term sort of thanks for coming, see you later proposition. And our startups are focusing on longer-term issues, even if they're just producing a small sort of kefir-based gelato like we have here at the Rocket Seeder stand. So Maria's focused on the bigger picture, the longer term, so, gut health, all of those sorts of issues. It's not just another food product to put on supermarket shelves.
Okay.
All of our startups are very passionate about what they do and mostly about sustainability as well and health, human health.
So your focus, it's not equity within the cohort, but it's after the cohort, post-cohort, then it could be an equity position depending on what the next step is. Is that the same for you, Renske? Is that the same business model?
It is now. So we are 5 years in, and to date we've been operating on a voluntary contribution of equity model. So if the startups feel like they got value from the experience, they process an equity contribution. But again, keep in mind that's an equity contribution to a nonprofit organization. So really this is about the entrepreneurs that are part of our portfolio are getting the advice and coaching and mentorship and C-suite on speed dial access to our network and our hands-on coaching, but they're contributing to the greater mission. So I think there's also, just in terms of putting a fine point on what that equity contribution is really going towards. And also at this point where it's, where our equity ask is really de minimis compared to what's market right now. But just to underscore, no question, these are long timelines. We, as a nonprofit, also do a lot of work to educate the investor ecosystem in terms of understanding that these are longer timelines, that we do need to have a fair amount of patient capital at the table early on. So we are also in it. It's a 3-year program for our portfolio.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a question just here to Gemma. I mean, you're a young entrepreneur. You're doing some amazing stuff in robotics and I guess electronic engineering and stuff that I don't understand. But for you, where you're at now, where would you like to be, and what do you need? Is it money? Is it support framework? Is it going to an accelerator like FS6 or Rocket Seeder? Or maybe if it's actually Gerardo over here, he might sign you up for the Young Innovator Nestlé program. What is it? What do you need?
I believe I just need the chance to make this idea or this concept a working reality. So whether the resources may be monetary value or mentorship by more experienced people who already have working companies that are already started up, I think that would be the most important thing, possibly good mentorship.
Mentors, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And help from accelerator companies.
Okay, so everyone in the audience, Gemma's here after the session, so you can come and sign her up. Nigel, over to you, and actually Nigel and Gerardo. I want to dig a little bit more into this corporate venturing model where you've got a startup that's come through, perhaps they've actually come through an accelerator program, they've got a great idea, it's a challenge-based innovation fixing a problem that you might have, or an opportunity that you might have in the business. How do they actually plug into, how do you plug those startups or those innovators into your ecosystem? How do you get them to scale? Is it market access? Is it money? Is it access to technology? How do you get them to scale?
So for every business problem or challenge that we post, whether it's through our R&D accelerator, our food accelerator, or even through Henry, one of the key criteria is that A, you have to have an identified pilot market, B, you have to have an initial funding to sort of lubricate the process. And then, depending on which one of those lanes it comes through, at the end of the period of time, the way that we integrate them into, because remember they're working very closely with the business owner or the R&D, so in a way they sort of become an extension of the team that they're working with. So they're getting exposed to the way that we work, or the way that we don't work, or the way that they would like to work. And depending on the technology or the IP or the solution that they bring, you could either do a JV with them, you could buy them outright, or you could do a minority interest. It really all does depend on the project that they're working on as well. So again, there's always bumps in the road, because you asked the question beforehand about, are they sort of, are they compatible? And we always talk about this mutual value exchange. If from the very beginning you don't have a two-way relationship with the startup or the entrepreneur, then you're setting yourself up for failure. It is not a one-way street. And a lot of work that we've done when we've tried to understand what are the needs of the startups, one of the most common themes that we always heard, and I think you mentioned it as well, is most startups don't want to get into bed with corporates because they think that we're going to steal their ideas, we're going to give them radio silence, we'll seduce them at the front, and then we'll just drop them by the wayside. So we've done a hell of a lot of work to ensure that when our internal clients work with startups, it's a very, very different way of how you manage them. They're not a third-party supplier. Startups are very, very different animals. And so you have to treat them accordingly. So we're very, very strict on how you articulate the problem, who are the senior stakeholders who are signing off that business brief, so that we try to mitigate, the chances of failure. Because just like any innovation project, 1, maybe 2 out of 10 actually make it through. Innovation is basically the business of failure. So you have to work very, very hard to ensure that you reduce those particular chances. And we have a very unique culture within our organization. And so, we do have to also adapt. We need that agility. We need that creativity. We need those external solutions, because we don't have all the answers. That's the reason why we've set up all of these different platforms and stuff. So that's the way that it basically works.
And can you tell us a little bit about Henry? I mean, how it operates?
Sure. So Henry is our global open innovation platform. By design, it's agnostic, and what I mean by that is that any function in the company can apply. So whether you're in marketing, sales, HR, support, whatever it is, as long as you meet the criteria, and that criteria means that your challenge has to be scalable, has to have business impact, it has to be transformational. You have to have a minimum of $50,000, which we use as the pilot partner proof of concept phase. Then it gets posted onto Henry. Myself and the team, we do all the heavy lifting. So we'll go out and do all the scouting and the discovery work for the startups against that particular challenge. We will then screen and filter which we feel are the best 5 startups, and those startups will pitch to the internal client, and then the internal client selects the best startup that they feel, both from a solution point of view and also from a chemistry point of view as well, works the best. So we can basically go from a brief to a solution in about 90 days.
Wow. Okay, that's fast.
Because most of the challenges are on the platform for about 45 to 70 days, depending on the complexity of the challenge. A few years ago, that was unheard of. Our launch to market for new product innovation was significantly longer than that. And to your point about disruption and competition, we've just had to step up our innovation intensity. And that means experimenting with all these different things. Now, not every single one is going to be pushed through the door, but we have to play and experiment with all these different models. Otherwise, we are going to be overtaken on the outside lane by all of these startups.
Nigel, just a question, and you can also comment on this bridging. But just in terms, we both live in Singapore, and there's huge influx of accelerators and attention based on the 30 by 30 food strategy from the Singapore government. How do you expect that is going to impact entrepreneurs like Gemma to have a chance to bring new innovations in food to that ecosystem? Is it going to be so busy and so complex that it's hard to manage, or is it just the leading edge of developing Singapore as an agri-food tech hub for Asia Pacific?
Well, tough question there. If you think about it from a maturity cycle standpoint, so let me take what we do as Rainmaking. We typically enter markets with Startup Bootcamp and Accelerator program. It goes on for 3 years, and then we move it on to what we call Rainmaking, which is a bit more corporate innovation-led. And the reason for that being that Startup Bootcamp, what it does is it's an entry point into market, but it plants a flag. Agri-food tech, for example, the term itself, the taxonomy never really existed until about 3-4 years ago, and Louisa on AgFinder was like, agri-food tech, it's a value chain. When you think of it as a value chain. And I think back to in 2012, so I was doing a startup in commodity trading risk management, software-based. We thought we were our competitors were SAP, were the likes of your big Oracle guys who are doing ERP systems, but at the same time, we were talking about how can you start authenticating trade on our platform, how can you do all this kind of algorithmic trading for palm oil on our platform, and actually, back then, the term agri-tech startup, those two terms never really existed. And I think if I parallel that to what I see today in Singapore, that term is a lot more prevalent today. So what's happening right now is that accelerators, if anything, the influx is not a bad thing. Managing is another thing altogether, but the influx means that what we're doing today is planting a flag. The next big question there is if you think about the value of death. It starts out with the value of death with a lot of new ideas coming in, and they need the accelerators to really support them there. And that's where angels and accelerators play the best in terms of funding. What needs to happen next, though, is the likes of your corporates coming in to be able to say, you're no longer just an idea. You've got a prototype, you've got a working solution, you've got an engineering team that can back it up. I'm actually willing, and the likes of Nestlé, for example, to come in and say, I'm actually willing to start taking time as a business to really invest into trying to solve the problem that we have today that we can't do today, but trying to also work with you then and try to bring you in. And to your point, Gerardo, earlier, so innovation ultimately is a business, and like any business, and we talk about lean startup in our world quite a fair bit. Innovation for us then is going to be lean, it's going to be portfolio driven. I think what we're going to see in a lot of the accelerator programs is a lot of and we use like the McKinsey model, Horizon 1, 2, and 3, where you're looking at core industries first. A lot of those problems that need to be solved today, those are where you find immediate ROI, and that's where it makes a lot of sense for accelerators to play in today. But then later stage stuff in Horizon 2, where it's adjacent industries, in Horizon 3, where it's more disruptive, that's where you start to find that there are fewer and fewer startups to collaborate with. It makes a lot more sense to start thinking about how do I start building something that's completely new. And that's the other side of the coin that we offer as well, in terms of how do we take an idea that we have, using unfair corporate assets that you have as a corporate, and going out there into market and trying to build a whole business around there.
Okay. Listen, we wanted to allow some time for questions from the audience, and also through the app, if you're a little bit shy to ask the question. So we have a roving microphone. If you'd like to just raise your hand, the guys will come around with the microphone. Let's kick it off. We have one question here on the app. It's actually for you, Gerardo. It's the old chestnut about coffee pods. What are you doing differently with coffee pods and innovating at Nestlé to bring them to the market and in a sustainable way?
I'm presuming the question is referring to our Nespresso business. So all Nespresso pods are made from recycled aluminium. And I don't know if probably in this part of the world, probably you didn't see the recent announcement, but we're also making products from those upcycled aluminium pods. So bicycles. We're also linking up with one of Switzerland's leading penknife manufacturers and pen manufacturers as well. So you've got this, what I would call the life cycle analysis is pretty robust in the sense that the pods get recycled and then made into pods again, or they can be upcycled and made into products which can be monetized for Nespresso Club members, or you can buy these products from the boutiques. Now, depending on where you live in the world, I mean, in Switzerland, for example, every commune has these big green Nespresso bins where you can put your used pods in. They'll be taken away and they'll be taken to our factories and they'll be recycled. So in Switzerland, I think it's nearly 96, 97% recycled, if not even higher. But in other parts of the world, depending on what the local legislation is or the local support with the local government or municipality, there can be differing rates. But they're working really, really hard to make sure that we're using the products over and over again, or the material over and over again.
Okay, perfect. Have we got any questions from the floor?
Yeah, one here.
Okay, perfect. If you could just say your name, please, and stand up so the guys can see you.
Morning, Marcus Kennedy. Is that on? Can you hear?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. A question for Emma. It was interesting hearing the comment around the lack of appetite for corporate partnering, let's call it broadly, and investment in accelerators. Interested to understand your perspective, why that is the case. I've been involved in 2 or 3 accelerators, mostly in Silicon Valley and in Europe. And it's tough here to get the corporates to really inside the C, and I've been inside the C-suite for the last few years. So thought from the inside, it's interesting to hear your perspective, and we can talk offline as well, but just for the audience, because I think that's one of the barriers that we're obviously several years, if not a decade, behind the US in that sort of spirit, but and probably more importantly, what we're doing to sort of change that and get influence inside the boardroom in particular.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and we may talk offline as well. I think it has something to do with scale. Australia is quite small, 25 million people, a strong economy, touch wood. But there isn't a lot of, there's a lot of, regional offices of multinationals here, and then a lot of privately owned corporates. And of course, you've got the sort of the in-between as well. But I think, as I mentioned before, it's about this. We're pretty new, this sort of startup thing in Australia. So people are very, and I don't know if it's an Australian thing, but we're very much sit back and wait for, to see what happens and what, someone else to take the first move, I guess. I'm actually a mentor for the Mars Food Accelerator program, so and they're doing a fabulous job with that program, and they're so committed, and it's very impressive how they've embraced the program. So I guess it is happening, it is starting to happen, but yeah, we need to sort of speed up the process and get corporates more engaged.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, over here.
Hi, I'm Cameron Turner. I'm the entrepreneur in residence in the business school, and I work a lot with academics and researchers, and I'm wondering, maybe it'd be interesting, Gerardo, maybe for you to comment on how is corporates interacting with fundamental science, with real research, which is, startups have got something that's probably been around for a while, whereas there's new discoveries, new breakthroughs that are in the lab that are finding it really hard. We're really bad at it here, and I think all around the world, trying to get ideas out of universities and out of research institutions is really, really hard. And startups are actually really difficult because, I mean, you've got two different languages, and then you have corporate, and you introduce a third language, and no one can talk to each other. So I'm interested maybe as the best practice, because, I mean, Nestlé in Switzerland, you've got great relationships with universities, I suspect. If you can maybe paint a bit of a picture as to how you interact with that Horizon 3 sort of new discoveries, which maybe you can't commercialise now, but in 3 to 5 years' time are going to transform the landscape. And maybe some advice for us as to how we can get better interaction between our researchers and either startups or corporate.
That's a great question. So you're absolutely right. So in Switzerland, at our Nestlé Research Centre, we have, I think, 700 of the most talented scientists, who some of them have got, double PhDs and God knows what else. So they're an amazing resource for our organisation. And when we talk about open innovation, our R&D colleagues have been doing open innovation with bodies of academia and university for decades now. So they continue to either sponsor PhD students who are working alongside our Nestlé Research Centre scientists, or they're sponsoring chairs in either gut health, the microbiome and other areas of science, just to try to accelerate and dig even deeper into the work that some of these scientists are doing. So that's a different stream of work. I mean, if offline, I can take your details and I can potentially put you into contact with the right individual who does that, because from a commercial point of view, we don't get involved in that. But they've been doing that line of work for many, many years to supplement and, as I said, to accelerate the work that these scientists are doing as well. If you think about our different categories, whether it's pet care, infant nutrition, food, how do you start to think about what we have the G1 to G5, so that's your Horizon innovation model. So when we talk about hardcore science, we're looking at innovation and concepts in G4 and G5, which are minimum 5+ years away. So we're now looking at cognitive health and bringing the science of cognitive health and behavior into pet care. What's the right type of nutrition for senior animals over the age of 7 that you can improve their cognitive behavior and performance and so forth, and visibly demonstrate that difference to the owners as well. And as an owner of 2 elderly pooches myself, I've seen those products absolutely deliver. I've seen how my 14 and 15-year-old lab and golden retriever respond to the molecule that they found, which basically feeds a particular part of the brain cell. So, but that's a body of work that really is done by R&D, but I can connect you with the right individual if you're interested.
Perfect. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anyone? Yes, over here.
Hello, it's Anthony from Startup FMCG. I guess I've been in the industry for some years now, and I guess of recent I've been mentoring a number of startups. And what I've noticed, because this space has somewhat been new to me, is one of the biggest hurdles really is financial. And many have dropped off because as a mentor, if I charge them, they can't keep going. So a lot of the times I haven't charged them, but then there's an issue with do they really want to continue? Are they resilient enough? And is their concept correct? So I guess, in summary, what I'm finding is money is a big issue. And if you don't have that kind of money, you're much more likely to fail. And what I'm also making a connection with is if you've got someone to fund you, quite often it's your parents, there's a much higher chance of success as well. My final observation is what's happening in the corporate world with the likes of Mars and Mondelez and Nestlé. I think it's fantastic. I unfortunately never had that as a startup myself at the age of 21. But it's fantastic in the sense that if you can employ an entrepreneur, and typically a person looking for a job is not an entrepreneur, but if you can employ an entrepreneur and somehow have them act as an entrepreneur within your corporate structure, then I think that's fantastic, given that now the entrepreneur doesn't have to build a factory, doesn't have to look for a contract packer. doesn't have to think about all those services that they need to contract themselves, because now they've got this entity that they could just bolt onto, and away they go and they do their thing.
Okay, perfect. I've got a couple of questions on the app here, just to close out. One really good one, I think. Maybe Renske and Emma, you can answer this one. What would you recommend for a new starter who wants to start a business but's not sure what idea to choose? So they're an entrepreneur, but they actually don't have a business idea.
Okay. I guess I would say think about whatever environment you're currently in. What are some of the biggest challenges or pain points that you are seeing and observing in that organization? And think about how you are uniquely suited to solve for some of those challenges. And I would also definitely, there's a lot of really great tests online and things that you can take to really evaluate if the entrepreneurial life is something for you. It's definitely difficult. So starting at the place of you're not sure where to start, I would say, also talk to other entrepreneurs, talk to people who have built businesses before, and look to them for guidance and advice, and talk about what the entrepreneur life is like.
I'll be a bit more blunt and say if you can't come up with an idea, probably entrepreneurship is not right for you, because the entrepreneurs that I know and work with have lots of ideas and sometimes too many, and that's exactly why it's good for them to do an accelerator program, because it really helps them, reduce the number of ideas down and focus. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Any advice, Gerardo?
I think building on the point that Emma just made, you've got. I mean, first of all, you need to articulate what that particular pain point or circumstance of struggle is. What is it that you're trying to solve? And if you're not very clear on that, then anything further downstream is going to be very fragile. I mean, as we said, for every 100 concepts that we see, maybe 1 or 2 actually stick. So not only does the idea have to be really deep-rooted in what is the consumer pain point or aspiration that you're trying to resolve, but it's got to be very unique and very differentiated, because it's so competitive out there in terms of, this idea sandbox. So, think very long and hard about what you're going to bring to the table.
Yeah, and maybe just to close out.
Same as Renske, I guess. Startups are fun and sexy. It's cool. It's really interesting. It's really nice to be in. It's a great environment to be in. You meet tons of people. It's fun, but it's not for everyone, genuinely. And I think it's really about biding your time as well. When you find something you really care about, go for that. If you don't find that, don't force it.
Okay. I want to give the final word to Gemma as we close out. I mean, if you had a message for these guys, what would it be? What would be the one thing that you need from them, or you're looking from them? And as a young entrepreneur, are you optimistic about the future in Australia for people like yourself?
To be able to have access to companies like this that help accelerate our startups is amazing, and gives me a lot of hope for the future, especially for young entrepreneurs and innovators like myself, because they really do help you, they really support you, and they help you along your journey. I do have a lot of hope for the future, especially with having amazing companies like this helping you along the way.
I think that's a perfect way to close it out. Would you like to give a round of thanks to the panel for today? And we'll go to a break now, so thank you very much.